Hey everybody, welcome to a special Tuesday edition of Mythic Monday, where we look at Mythic Plus through the eyes of healers. We got a big one this week. We're going to be looking at our first week of our brand new season and looking ahead into week 2. We're going to be discussing the healing meta, the dungeon difficulty, taking a kind of a look at next week's affixes, and then of course the random thought of the week. Are we better off without a seasonal affix? Let's get into it. Let's start with the healing meta. As usual, as always, I want to qualify this by saying this is the sub-creation tier list for healers based on data in keys 16 to 23 and not my personal tier list. This has been jumping around a lot this week, and the only really consistent thing has been Resto Shaman being on top. So here's my 2 cents about the list so far. Take it with a massive grain of salt, as this is very likely not the M plus meta forming before our eyes just yet. It's important to note that many of the top players are focused on gearing out their raiding healers right now, and the raid healer meta is quite a bit different than what I think the healer meta will turn out to be in Mythic Plus, leading to some more raid-oriented healers being higher up on the list for the time being. For example, Druid being a really bad raid healer is going to hurt it right now in Mythic Plus, as it's not getting much play from very high-level raiders. I still think it's a really good M plus spec though, and will likely rise over time. Similarly, I think Holy Paladin and Mistweaver might be being overrepresented here a bit, as they're performing really well in raid, and I would also be willing to bet that Holy Priest raiders are likely doing keys as disc, explaining why the spec is representing really high in M+, while Holy Priest is showing up so high in raid. It's really too early to speak to an M+ healer meta just yet, although I do think it's pretty safe to say that Shaman is going to be a very good dungeon healer. It's also worth noting that the vast majority of the player base is probably not running a 4-set bonus yet, and that would be a pretty important piece of the puzzle when we think about which healers are going to be really good in Mythic Plus. The good news is that the exception of Holy Priest, everything is looking pretty balanced for the time being, so if you don't like what you see here, I wouldn't worry too much about it just yet, as it's honestly just too early to make much of this data. So one of the things I'm most excited to talk about is the week 1 dungeon difficulty. We've had a few hot fixes go out this week that I think have been really helpful, and I love that they were done so quickly, and since they did come out pretty early in the week, I think the tier list is pretty accurate. At first glance though, we can see that the spread of dungeons across the tier list experiences vary greatly from dungeon to dungeon at the moment. Underrot is looking like our new Shadow Moon Burial Grounds in the S tier, and while it's kind of funny to be talking about Underrot in this way for those of us that played in BFA, the dungeon has a really lenient timer and seems to be generously tuned. I know I've had some pretty sideways Underrot runs come in on time, and in most of my pug runs the only issue we've really run into has been people not knowing how to deal with mushrooms yet. Freehold also coming in on the easy side for similar reasons to Underrot. For this tyrannical week, the bosses in here felt rather forgiving compared to many of the other dungeons as well. In my pug runs, aside from Captain Eudora getting a few too many kills, this place went quite smoothly. Halls of Infusion comes in the B tier, pretty understandable, as again, the bosses in this one felt rather forgiving compared to some of the ones we'll get to in a minute, but the place does have its pitfalls, and I'm predicting that this place is going to be a totally different animal come Fortified week, which I think a lot of the trash in here is going to absolutely slap. Also, I know they made some changes to the run back in here, but I still think it's pretty poorly designed and just needs some checkpoints. It's pretty amazing to see Brackenhide at the front of the C tier given its start. On Tuesday, the last boss of Brackenhide was super tough due to the health of her totem and the massive healing absorb she was putting on the tank. Now though, it feels a lot more fair, and I'd actually expect to see this one continue to rise over the coming weeks. I felt like this one was one of the more fun dungeons overall, with some fun boss mechanics and big trash pools. Another candidate for a tough dungeon on Fortified week though, I think. Based on my own experiences, I'm actually a little surprised to see Oldemon as low as it is, especially being behind Brackenhide. This one didn't feel too bad for me as a healer, although it does have some scary moments like when you get a bleed overlapping with the knockback on the 3rd boss. Great dungeon to bring a priest for, as Mass Dispel has some big moments in this dungeon too. I can definitely imagine how the boss damage in here could scale in pretty bad ways though, as keys get higher and higher. Vortex Pinnacle, I guess, surprises me a little bit too from the healer point of view. The constant incoming damage and movement on the 2nd boss is pretty tough to deal with, but I didn't feel as though the 1st or last boss were too bad. Again, as key levels scale up though, it's not uncommon to find that abilities you barely noticed in the teen range start to really wreck your group in high keys, so I'll trust this one becomes a lot more difficult on Tyran weeks as the key level gets higher and higher. Now these last two, I have no difficulty understanding why they're ranked so low. Luxthos has some pretty brutal group damage going out, and while the hotfix making it so you can use your items on the last boss while moving is a fantastic and necessary quality of life change, I think further nerfs are needed in here. As a healer, Forge Master Gorik is quite tough, and Warlord Sarga was a huge struggle for the pugs I ran in this week. Finally, Neltharion's Lair in the F tier. This was basically unfair on the first day of Season 2, and thankfully Blizzard reacted quickly with some nerfs to the final two bosses. Clearly though, still the toughest dungeon in the poll, and I'd fully expect to see some more hotfixes coming soon to get this place more in line with everything else. So usually this is where we'd go over next week's affixes, but Blizzard has decided to keep that a secret from us so far this season. The one thing we can bank on is Fortified, and my experiences this week have led me to believe that we're in for a rude awakening next week. I think some dungeons like Halls of Infusion and Brackenhide Hollow are going to be really difficult on Fortified. There's some really nasty trash dots and bleeds going out this season, and I'd recommend that when you see something like that can't be dispelled, you focus as much attention on that player as you can. Remember that on Fortified weeks, trash is essentially your bosses, and you should be popping cooldowns as such. Respect the trash and don't think you can get away with the same kind of healing that you can on tyrannical trash, or you're going to wind up on the floor. Since Blizzard gave us the first week off from learning new affixes to get used to the dungeons, I'm going to bet they're going to give us our first Fortified week to continue learning them as well. So my prediction is Fortified Volcanic Sanguine. Just keep in mind that prediction is based on essentially nothing. So the random thought of the week, are we better off without a seasonal affix? I think it's easy to be prisoners of the moment and just be super glad that Thundering, one of the most lackluster seasonal affixes of all time, is finally gone, but I will remind you that there have been really popular and fun seasonal affixes in the past, like Encrypted and Awakened. At their best, seasonal affixes can be a lot of fun because they would increase player power and add another layer of strategy to a run, and at worst, they feel like an afterthought that adds unnecessary complexity to an already stressful situation. Personally, I like to see success in Mythic Plus be more about dealing with the dungeons themselves and less about dealing with affixes. Since M+'s introduction in Legion, we've seen affixes nerfed to the point where most of the really hard ones have either been trivialized or removed completely. So clearly I'm not alone in thinking this way. If Blizzard doesn't want to take the time to make S-tier seasonal affixes, and they don't seem to want to, I'm all for them reinvesting that time into balancing the game or making better dungeon experiences overall. I'm really enjoying not hearing Marked by Lightning and the elephant's answer to me in game anymore, although I think I still hear it in my sleep. Alright, our first Mythic Monday of the season is in the book, so I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think about the healing meta right now? How do you feel about balance? Of the new dungeons, what was easy for you? What was hard for you? Do you agree with the tier list on sub creation? Let me know what you guys think about the seasonal affix. Are you glad that everything's gone? Would you like a different one? Let me know in the comments, guys, and if you made it this far in the video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to see more in the future, and if you want, check out my live stream right here on YouTube, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 9 p.m. Pacific. We play lots of different healing specs, do lots of keys. It's a great time, and I hope I see you there. All right, until next time, happy healing.